People call this country the Great American Melting Pot. The promise of the nation is that anyone who comes here will be welcomed with open arms, but it's clear that this ideal isn't met. The underlying understanding of the melting pot is that to join it, people have to be willing to be melted down. Everyone is allowed to be themselves, but they are encouraged to be someone that fits the mold. Inside this contradiction lies the root of the American dream. Despite constantly shifting pressures towards conformity, Americans have consistently demanded the promise of America. They have demanded the fulfillment of the American dream, the right to be an individual. The 1920s were supposedly a time of growing freedom in America. The economy was good, and following a devastating war, the nation was ready to have fun. But this newfound freedom only applied if your skin was white. African Americans in the 20s still faced the limitations of a deeply racist society. They were expected to accept their place, to conform to segregation. But instead, many African Americans chose to demand the right to their American dream, the right to be an individual instead of sacrificing themselves to fit into the social expectation. One of the most well-known poets of this period was Langston Hughes, a member of the Harlem Renaissance. Hughes addressed the issue of the American dream in his poem, I Too Sing America. This poem is narrated by an African American who refers to himself as the darker brother. He says that he is sent from the table to the kitchen when company comes. But in the end, he says that, tomorrow I'll be at that table. They'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. This affirmation is clearly based on the American dream. The narrator refuses to be a lesser citizen and states a firm belief in his own personal worth. He knows that one day others will see his beauty. So now he demands the fulfillment of the American dream, to be recognized and respected as the individual he is. In the 1950s, America faced a new brand of conformity in the form of consumerism. Families moved out to the suburbs where everyone lived in the same houses, had the same cars, bought the same appliances. The social pressures to conform to this standard lifestyle was enormous. Again, however, there was a group which defied this conformity. This group was known as the Beats. One of the best-known poets of this movement was Allen Ginsberg, who addressed the loss of individuality in his poem, A Supermarket in California. Ginsberg's narrator finds himself taking a trip alone at night to the supermarket. This seemingly mundane trip is juxtaposed by the narrator's conversation with Walt Whitman, the transcendentalist poet who the author's imagining is with him. The supermarket is a symbol of consumerist conformity in America, which the narrator is clearly not a part of. He's isolated, depicted alone, taking solace in an imagined interaction with a man of the past. But it's clear that the source of his separation is the denouncement of the conformist consumerism of his society. By choosing to be alone, he shows his pursuit of the American dream. He refuses to sacrifice his individuality despite the consequences of defying conformity. Though the 80s are often referred to as the Me generation, this didn't mean that they were a time of great individuality. The great divisor of this era was money. Those who had it were allowed to be individuals, defined by what they could buy. Those who didn't have it were increasingly encouraged to be silent. The prosperous didn't want to hear about the imperfect identities and realities of those less fortunate than them. It was this mentality that overlooked the rising poverty rate and allowed the AIDS epidemic to silently kill thousands. There were many who were struggling just to get by, who had to put their individuality on the back burner. They had to hide their problems and be who others wanted them to be, just to survive. It was into this context that Charles Bukowski appeared as the poet of America's peripheral culture. In his poem, Bluebird, Bukowski's narrator begins by telling us, "There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him." The bluebird, his real self, is kept locked away from the world because the narrator is afraid that it'll mess him up, or screw up the works, or blow his book sales in Europe. The narrator cannot afford the repercussions of the world refusing to accept him. But the message of the poem isn't one of defeat. At the end, the narrator describes how he lets the bird out at night when they're alone. He says the bird is singing a little in there. I haven't quite let him die. And it's nice enough to make a man weep, but I don't weep, do you? The man clearly loves and preserves his identity despite the obstacles, and by breaking the fourth wall, the narrator does reveal the bird, expressing a hope that one day he'll be able to share his identity. Even though Bukowski's narrator seems to be losing a battle with conformity, it's clear that he's still fighting for the fulfillment of his American dream. In our day and age, we still face pressures to conform. In my own poem, I looked at the effect of the internet on individuality. Some people would say it's easy to be an individual on the internet. Websites like Twitter, Tumblr, YouTube, they connect people and encourage them to share themselves with others. But many of these websites have usernames to hide behind. Is it really an expression of individuality to only reveal our thoughts to people who don't know us? When a name is attached, like on Facebook, people watch what they say. I think that people should use the internet as a tool to express themselves, rather than an outlet enabling them to hide themselves from others. To examine this idea, my poem is constructed entirely in the form of Facebook status updates. So as the poem goes along, the posts change. At first they all begin without a name. Instead they're posted by Facebook user. They're mundane, the kind of posts that everyone makes that don't really say anything. As the poem goes on, though, the post gets more personal. They say more about the poster, even in simple ways, like their interests or favorite things. By the end, the poster is saying things that really matter to them, expressing their concerns, their fears, their thoughts. It's at this point that the poster gets a name, and they also get someone who comments back, because someone is able to connect to the poster because they've shared themselves. The poster is rewarded for pursuing the American dream, and the barriers of technology are broken down to be replaced by the potential technology has. The times have changed, and the sources of conformity have changed with them. Through these poems, it's clear to see that Americans have always had to struggle in the pursuit of individuality, but it's equally clear that they have always kept going, kept following their American dream. Perhaps the fight for acceptance has become an essential part of the process. By threatening to melt its people down, America has only strengthened their resolve to pursue the dream. Regardless of the obstacles, Americans have shown that in the end, individuality will always break through the barriers of conformity.